Hello, everybody, and welcome to Daily Coaching. Daily Coaching are currently hosting a number of discussions with ex and current professional players within the game and discussing their experiences of being coached, all the way from sort of grassroots level through to academies and then into the elite professional game. And I'm delighted to announce today that with us we have Simon Cox, who is currently playing at Western Sydney Wanderers and has also played for various clubs over within England as well, and is also a international with Republic of Ireland. And we'll let him sort of explain a little bit more around that throughout his journey. But first of all, I'd just like to say a massive welcome and a big thank you to Simon for joining us. And Simon, if you don't mind just kind of starting us off then, from when you first started of football, carrying us all the way through to where you are now.
Yep, well, thanks for having me on. So basically my journey started when I was around sort of the eight or nine age. Played Sunday League football, local side, and was very fortunate enough to get a bit of a lucky break. I was playing in the same team as one of the coaches, his sons for my local side. He was the coach at Reading at the time, and he basically asked me to come down one evening for a trial with the Centre of Excellence as Reading were at that time, and if I liked it, sign on. If I didn't, worry about it and carry on playing Sunday League football. So I had one day where I went down there, really enjoyed it, made some good friends, and basically signed for Reading in their Centre of Excellence and played at all levels, all the way 9 through to 21, and left, about 21, and I left and tried to reach pastures new at other clubs.
Nice. And kind of starting off then, so using your sort of grassroots team, your Sunday team, was that something which you wanted to kind of go into, or was it kind of something which your family said, look, let's get you involved in the team and start from here sort of thing?
I've got an older brother, and he played obviously years ahead, like a couple of years ahead of me, but he played in the same Sunday League team, just obviously a few years above, and I was a couple of years below. So it was just something that naturally I did, and I think my school friends, some of them played for the same team, some of them played for teams. So it was just one of those natural things that I went on to do. And to be honest, I loved every minute of it. It's outside of your school football teams and stuff like that is one where you actually get to enjoy a little bit more, because you're playing with your mates, and there's no real strategy to playing with your mates. It's basically just a nice kickabout on a Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, and you enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think as well, it's interesting because often there's always two ways people kind of go about getting into these like grassroots Sunday teams, and it's either the route of kind of the parents saying, look, let's just get you involved in a team, and you kind of naturally make friends anyway, or like you kind of said yourself, you kind of go into a team where you kind of already know people. I think that makes it so much easier because, like you said, there's no pressure. You're just playing football like you would do maybe in the school playground or outside of school, but it's in a bit more of a, say, competitive, not overly competitive, but a bit more of a competitive structure where it feels a bit more like a team. And
yeah, absolutely. I think like for me, like I said, it was a natural progression, go from your school playground with all your mates to going and carrying that on pretty much with most of them who played at the same team, and it just felt exactly the same. It felt very natural to make that transition from the school playground into a Sunday League team. So but what was nice actually is that we pretty much stuck together through the age groups of the Sunday League team as well. So that was 8s, 9s, 10s, all the way through to your sort of 15s when I was leaving sort of primary school, secondary school, into secondary school. And then when I got to sort of sign my contracts with Reading Academy, I kind of had to give that up, which I wasn't overly too happy about, because Reading were very much had the mindset of, we don't want you to get injured while playing Sunday League football. And it sort of clashed a little bit as well, because Reading in the early ages of the academy, they played Sundays as well. So Sunday mornings, 11 o'clock, you would play them. And then if your Sunday League team were playing at say 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, I was kind of eager to quickly jump in the car and try and get across to wherever that was. But they quickly put a stop to that because they didn't want me to play too much or get injured or anything else like that, because, you know, I was sort of deemed a Reading, you know, footballer at the time. So it was one of those where, you know, I was happy to be under that umbrella of Reading, but ultimately it was a decision that was quite tough at, you know, a very young age as well.
Yeah, no, of course. And again, I think that's such a big sort of factor, really, because I know that's, you know, I get academies kind of standpoint of, like you said, you know, they see you as their player, they don't want you to get injured. You know, as well, sometimes they don't want other clubs to see you play as well. So there is that battle. But at the same time, like you said, if that's the environment, and one of the things which we talk about in coaching so much is setting the environment for players. If that's the environment which is going to make you flourish and, you know, play with freedom and express yourself on the pitch, then yeah, it's that tough way up. What was the kind of difference? Because it's interesting as well that you was doing obviously your grassroots team and also the early stages of the sort of before you went to the actual academy section of it. What was the kind of difference within the coaching? Because obviously I'm taking it, as many people do, when they play with friends, it's more of a social aspect. But then I suppose when you go to Reading, there's obviously, you know, a philosophy which they're trying to get you to play with, and, you know, there's these coaches with badges and knowledge. What was the difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because the coaches of the Sunday League team were probably your dad and your dad's mate, or one of the other parents and stuff. So, you know, they probably didn't have badges or great deal of coaching. It was basically pick the, you know, whether it's 8-a-side, whether it's 6-a-side, whether it's, you know, 10-a-side, whatever it would be. Basically pick the best players and away you go. But training was pretty much very similar. It wasn't structured in any way. There wasn't really any end goal to it, as long as I think the boys run around and had fun. That was pretty much it, to be honest. But you're right, with going into the academy at Reading, there was a little bit more structure to it. Coaches have got badges. Coaches have got ideas to get out of the sessions. But ultimately, again, similar really, because you're still young at that age. You know, if you're 16s, 15s, 14s, you know, you're still pretty young and you're still developing into a grown up. Ultimately, it's still based around trying to have as much, you know, fun as possible, but with a bit of structure to it as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think again, fun is one of the biggest elements which is lost as players get older. You know, coaches often think, well, you know, as I get with an older team, it needs to look more structured. It needs to look more sort of, you know, phases of plays or, you know, different scenarios. But I think that fun element, no matter how old you are, you know, that will never be lost. And ultimately, you start off as a kid and want to play football because you enjoy it. You don't then get to an age where, you know, you're being, it doesn't happen often now, but like the typical thing of running around the pitch. Or, you know, rondos can be fun, but if you're doing rondos for an hour and you're only getting one touch on the ball within that hour, then all of a sudden your engagement's lost as well. So yeah, I think it's interesting that, you know, it's true that there is that element of fun needed and brought out, whether it be just in a different way, maybe because the coaches at the academies have more ideas or a bit more knowledge behind them. But yeah, I definitely think that there is that transition. And was you able to take any of the coaching you got Reading back into your Sunday team as well? So did you sort of come and notice that?
Not really, because as soon as told me you're not allowed to play anymore, that was it. I had to pretty much cut ties with the Sunday team, and then it was, you know, schoolwork and playing with your school team as you know, they set a Reading where I could only play with my school team if it was inside school hours, which most of the games are normally after school. Yeah. So I kind of tried to get as many school games in as I could, just to continue playing with my friends, really. And then, you know, mostly it was Reading at the time when I first went there. It was a Tuesday and Thursday evening training session. then obviously when you go into the academy, when you leave school, it's then every day and then games at the weekend. So it's a completely different. You then have to sort of become a footballer when you sort of leave school.
Yeah, of course. And so getting to that stage then, so you've obviously gone into, like you said, the leaving school element of it, and I suppose if you want to call it the dreams getting closer. What happened after that then? So you was obviously at Reading, and what was the kind of path that followed?
So basically, yeah, you're right. I left school, had to then become and live the sort of lifestyle of a footballer. You're 16, you've just left school, and all your mates are now going to the pubs and drinking and everything else. And then you get a knock on the door on the Friday evening when the guys have sort of finished their jobs and stuff, and you're coming up to the pub, and I'm going, we've got a game tomorrow. So my dad was very much no, you're not going anywhere, stay indoors sort of thing, which, looking back at it, well, definitely the right decision.
Yeah.
But, I got pretty used to going in every day. I got a good grounding, which I think is very important for people who, especially in the football industry, who, players today, I think, get given a lot more than probably what's earned. And I had to earn everything. We had to do jobs, clean boots, dressing rooms. It was all of that sort of older school stuff. But it gave me a great grounding. I was in and around senior players every day. People who'd been doing it for, 10, 15 years and, relied on the income and everything else. And, results at the weekend, they were paramount. You had to win to pay your bills and your mortgages and things like that. But I mean, ultimately it was great. I really enjoyed it. Being in every day, learning, asking questions, doing extras, all that sort of stuff. Because obviously at 16 I couldn't drive, so you were sort of based at the training ground, and you had to wait for somebody potentially who lived near you to maybe get a lift or a lift into the town centre. So you had to get the bus back or whatever. They were long days, but they were days where, listen, you just started out as a professional footballer. What more could you want, really? So it was a really good sort of first couple of years, really, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah, nice. And again, something you picked up on quite early there about I agree. I think that players are given a lot more nice things within the game as it is nowadays, and potentially, like you said, when you was first starting out. And I think that one of the things which is almost forgotten about so much, especially within coaching and within football as well, is coaching life skills. It's such a big thing of there's all the focus is on the technical work that they're going to be doing, whether it be individual, whether it be team based or unit based, whatever it may be. But they kind of forget about the life skills. And I think especially at, say, for example, those young ages like 16, 17, 18, and you can even argue up to about the age of 21, these boys are still becoming men. And I think that, like you said, even just doing jobs around training ground, around these older players, it's setting you up for communication skills. It's setting you up for strategizing, planning. How they want me to do this? How am I going to do it? Am I going to do this by myself? Have I got to do it with somebody else? Have I got a time I need to do it in? Whatever it may be. And I think that's, like I said, it's so important because, yes, there's being a footballer, but then there's also the other things which come with it. Like you said, some people have to pay their bills. That's what they're doing it for. And, there's things like that as well. Understanding that the more work you put in, the potential more things you're going to earn out of it, whether it be sort of, like I said, those characteristics you build from it, or whether it be financial. So, yeah, interesting that you
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, well, put it this way, my first job as a scholar at Reading when I was in every day was making the teas for the first team management staff. First team manager at the time was Steve Coppell. He had assistants, Kevin Dillon, Wally Downs, goalkeeping coaches, chief scouts who was in there. I mean, we probably had 7 to 10 people in there at any one time. And then it was literally, you get in at 9 o'clock and they wanted first tea at 9:10. So you were literally and you had to memorize what they wanted. It was whether it was 1 sugar, no sugar, milky, whatever it was, and you end up having to sort of. But what I found was good was that I was talking to the first team manager at the age of 16 every day, regardless of his result at the weekend, regardless of how his morning's been or anything else. It was like, morning, would you like a tea? Yes. So on, all the way through the 10 people or so in the room. Yes, tea. So it was like I had an engagement with the first team manager, probably earlier than somebody, or like 2 or 3 others, or maybe 10 or 12 others. So you're right. Life skills. I got given a life skill like that really early on in that sort of sense. So and I'm very much a believer at the minute. Somebody who's obviously going into trying to do coaching, is you coach the person before the player, because the person, you have to be able to engage with the person. You kind of want to know a little bit about that person, what makes them tick, what they enjoy, what they don't like, because everyone's an individual. Even though we play a team sport, we're all individuals. We don't all like the same things. And like I said before, I was in and around, say the first team manager, but I was in and around senior players, and you've got some who were, say, flair players, and you've got some who were people who decide just to kick the ball as far away from goal as possible. And ultimately, they're 2 completely different people outside of the game, but 2 completely different people on the pitch as well. So, and they, you talk to them in one way or a different way, and ultimately, they give you the life experience that you ask for when you sort of go into that environment and you ask questions and you're around it for 2 or 3 years or so. You start to pick up a few things, and I was really happy about my grounding, because I felt like it was vital for me sort of growing up. And then when I became a senior pro at clubs, I sort of drew that back, and was like, well, how was I treated? And I know you probably can't treat young players the same way that some of us were treated back then. But ultimately, talking to the younger players, I think now is a vital part of them growing up, and them and being approachable and sort of being allowed to ask questions. I think it's a great tool, being able to have that life experience.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think, and even as well from a sort of inspirational point of view as well. I mean, I think, again, these boys or girls coming through at really young ages, and obviously they know what they want to become. And I suppose the club helps them develop through that. But it's, like you said, getting the chance to speak to these players or managers who will be able to give you guidance, be able to put you on the right tracks, tell you your do's and your don'ts, and listen, do you know what? You might take some things away from some of them, some things you might not take away from other players, but it's, again, that's a decision-making process, which, as a player, and even as an individual, away from football, as an individual, it's what helps you and your characteristics, I think. So, yeah, massively important.
Absolutely.
And kind of picking up on two points here. Kind of like I said a minute ago, in an academy, you're kind of going through more of that developmental stage. And although obviously clubs will have, like I said, philosophies, which, for example, yourself, they'll say, well, look, this is what the Reading player looks like. And whether it be right or wrong, sometimes they try and get every player molded into that typical Reading player. But obviously, whether it's strikers, midfielders, whatever, there's going to be that differentiation. But when you're obviously in the academies and then moving into the first team, how does that training kind of differ? And the second point I want to kind of lead on was, obviously you play for some massive clubs in, West Brom, Reading, Swindon, Southend. How does that change with, like you said a minute ago, around kind of, understanding individuals? Managers come and go all the time, whether it be they move on to new opportunities or in some unfortunate circumstances, but as the game goes, they get sacked. How did you have to adapt what they was telling you to do?
Well, ultimately, I think academy coaching is completely different to first team coaching. Academy coaching is basically, like you said, moulding a player, trying to get them to a level where technically they're very good, tactically they're very good. They understand the game. They understand not just one position, but maybe 2 or 3. Because you might not be the best player in your position. You might have to then go and fill in a position maybe you know, if you're a centre forward, if you might be able to play in the number 10, or you might be able to play out on one of the two wings, or centre midfield, or if you're a fullback, you know, you see in different systems at the minute, you know, you might have to play as a third centre half. You know, these are the sort of things that academy coaching and the coaching actually gives you a chance to learn. So I found that really intelligently very nice, and something that I took on board a lot, actually. And I had some really good academy coaches. Brendan Rodgers was one of my first academy coaches. He was a very, you know, meticulous person even back then, and he, you know, it was all about the technical side of things. Tactically, probably wasn't great back then, but ultimately it was all about the technical ability, practicing left foots, right foots, headers, things you're not good at, that sort of stuff. And then I had a guy who's sadly no longer with us, Eamon Dolan. He was completely different to Brendan. So Brendan then moved on to Chelsea. And then Eamon came in, and Eamon had a Exeter City background. And you've got Reading at one level and Exeter City at a different one. So he had to obviously think, well, I'm not dealing with senior players anymore. I'm dealing with young players. So his coaching style changed. And his was a little bit more like the harder you work, the better you'll become, that sort of thing. Whereas Brendan was tactical. We'll if we play with the ball, we'll be a better team. That sort of thing. So you have to sort of evolve and move with what, you know, the way the club was going. So the club obviously moved on to Eamon, and like I said, it was more, you know, how you know how much you can run, and how much you know sort of you got around the pitch and that sort of thing. Athletically, we were probably one of the fittest team in the sort of academies at the time. So that's, I mean, ultimately academy level football, it changes through the age groups as well, depending, unless they've got like a philosophy from the first team manager all the way through the academy, and all academy coaches have to teach the players the exact same way, so that they're sort of moulding all the way up to the first team or not. I don't know. Reading wasn't that way. It was a little bit different, but then ultimately when you get into the first team, and like I've touched on before, these are people who rely on results at the weekend, and for win bonuses, for appearance bonuses, and in making sure that this is their livelihood. So winning games is ultimately, if you stay in that division or you get promoted from that division, you sort of earn a little bit more, or you get exposed to a little bit more. But if you go the other way and you get relegated from that division, salaries reduce. You know, you might not be able to do one or two things that you've already done. So it can be it's a completely different level of coaching in the first team than it is in the academy level, because ultimately the end result is the game on a Saturday and the result.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think as well, kind of as you touched on, because it is a results-based business, I think, you know, the manager's priority, where, listen, from an outside perspective, you know, everyone have opinions on, you know, things they should do and ways that their team should play. But like I said, you know, in that situation, you're the decision makers and you have to do that. So, you know, if you lose a game quite heavily, you have to look at the things. Why did we lose heavily? What we got to try and do differently next time? And I think obviously the way in which coaching has moved forwards now, in terms of, you know, you even have obviously various different specialists within a coaching team, like you said, even at Reading. You know, you don't just have one person; it's a team of people. And you know, you have analysts now who will look so deeply into certain aspects of opposition's games, their own team's game, and you know, now in a way they can highlight things so quickly, which is good, obviously. But at the same time, you know, it's not going to be able to be as individual based as, say, for example, when you're at an academy, because, you know, not necessarily the time, but also the pressure. Whereas, like you said, in the first team, it's, you know, I have to get my message across. And I think that's why it's kind of so important as well in terms of understanding the player, because when you come into a new environment and a new dressing room, obviously depending on the reputation that you have as a manager or as a coach, you know, number one, that could be enough to potentially win over the dressing room as it is, depending on what you've previously done. But if you're a manager or a coach that's coming into the game and you're pretty new to it, and you potentially got players in the team that have, let's say, done bigger things, but, you know, have opinions and, you know, have knowledge behind them as well, it's quite hard, I suppose. So even just in terms of understanding, you know, who are the leaders within the team, who's going to be able to help us on that journey of getting through, who are the players that need a little bit of motivating. And it kind of links in quite nicely, because I was going to say that obviously players are motivated off different things, let's be honest, depending on which league you're in. Some might even be motivated off money, which is absolutely fine. But throughout your career, what's kind of motivated you from coaches? Has it been that sort of, the kick up the backside to say, look, do this, sort of the do's and the don'ts, or has it sort of been a thing of more of that guided discovery of, look, this is what we want to try and do, you try and work out how we do it?
Well, I think ultimately, I agree with what you've said there. I think ultimately, if you walk into a dressing room and you've got a manager who you respect straight away, you buy into that as a player. But if you're a brand new manager and you've not, say, managed before, or you've sort of come up from the youth teams and you've taken over because someone unfortunately got the sack because results haven't been great, you need to sort of hit the ground running with every player. And I say this to a lot of the young players whenever I've been in a dressing room where, somebody's unfortunately lost their job, is the first meeting between the new manager and the players will tell you everything you need to know about that manager and whether you're going to buy into it straight away or not. And I've been in dressing rooms where I've come out of that meeting and felt like who's this guy? Why is he taking over? He doesn't really seem that bothered about being here. He's obviously just got himself a new job, so he's fine. But then, on the flip side of that, I've come out of meetings and I thought, come on, let's go. Let's get this going. I'm really looking forward to working with you. And then I think, like you said, ultimately managers or new coaches coming into the game, they need to assess their squads pretty quickly. And you're right in saying that if it's a new manager, he's coming into a first team environment, you sort of oversee the senior players first and foremost, or probably maybe your big earners maybe, or your most talented players. So whether that's somebody who's been doing really well that year, you sort of get them in really early and just say, really looking forward to working with you, want you on board, want you to buy into what we're going to be doing. We're going to do really good things this year, or for the next 6 months, or however long it is. And then you sort of build from there. Really, like I said, I've been in rooms where, I had one at Southend when Chris Powell came in, and he sort of came in, and we were like, really look forward to this. And then all of a sudden, the following season, things started to sort of unravel a little bit. We got some unfortunate injuries to key players, and then it never really materialised what we wanted. And then ultimately, unfortunately, he ended up getting the sack as well. So, and you thought that if he'd have had all the players that he wanted fit and ready to go, we probably could have done something together. But he was just a little bit unlucky, really. But managers and coaches and stuff, and specialists, like you said, analysts and stuff, in a first team, I think that's one thing that the way that coaching's going at the minute is individualizing a lot of extra little bits, and that doesn't have to be be in the classroom. That can be just sitting down with your analyst or your assistant manager, or even necessarily your manager, and just going through, the game from the other day. And analysts can have things brought up pretty quickly now. They code every game, so it's great. And obviously, if you've got that facility to be able to do that, is incredible. But you can go through things. You can ask them questions a lot more, and you can understand. Again, goes back to understanding the person. Why did you do that as a player? Or why did you do that? What, how did you feel on that day? Why were you feeling that way? Is it something during the week? And then you can look at all the stats and everything else. You can get really, really in depth with the coaching and that now. So it's really, really interesting. I'm kind of looking forward to it, I'll be honest, but also a little bit nervous about it as well, because you've got to have a good team behind you.
I think this is the thing, though. It's quite interesting, because again, I agree. I think it's, a lot of time we said people concentrate on the hows within football coaching, and it's about the technical elements of it. But I think just as important, it's the how, when, where, and why. And that why is so important, because so often, especially taking it all the way back to a Sunday league grassroots side, you always get either parents shouting classical lines like "oh, shoot, kick," okay, but why or where? Like they're just shouting out. And also as well, you'll get coaches potentially not necessarily criticising them for saying it, but they'll go, don't shoot. Okay, but why? Why shouldn't they shoot? From a player's point of view, like you said, especially when you take it into a professional game and they're looking at things in a bit more depth. Oh, well, I know that centre back has been pretty slow throughout the game, so I knew that he wasn't going to get quick. He wasn't going to get close enough to me quick enough, and I'd have enough time and enough space to shoot. So, yeah, I think those how, when, where, and why is massive. And also, like you kind of said about the like specificness now of the way that coaching's going. I think there's certain clubs now which have like big teams behind them. And like you said, even just having those meetings are so crucial, not only for the club's development, but also for the players' development as well. Do they ever give you anything to do away from training? So like look at things or analyse your own game?
There's so many tools online now and so many apps or softwares that clubs and that use now. Some have got their own, some use things like Huddle. That's available that you can sort of clip and your analyst or even the club can just basically upload the game with everybody's name on it, and then you can just highlight your own name and then it will just be your clips. Some clubs will go into ridiculous detail, which would be your forward passes or your backward passes, or if you're a striker, how many times you went into the 18-yard box, or how many forward runs you made, or how many shots you had on target, off target, blocked, that sort of stuff. Clubs are, getting to that. Well, they're probably already at that level. They're probably going a little bit further. I know that one club in the Premier League now has a specialist throw-in coach for retaining possession and for keeping and for winning possession back. So it's because they see it as a restart where they're in control. They're in control from the throw-in, and you can set something up. It's basically like a free kick or a corner. You're in control. I know you've got a time constraint, but you as long as you don't take in how much you take in on a throw-in, but as long as you sort of throw it to your teammate and you retain possession, I think everybody's pretty happy. And they looked into that because they were, I think, 12th in the Premier League from retaining possession from throw-ins and from winning possession back from opposition throw-ins, and now they're the top in the Premier League from doing it. So it sort of makes you wonder if going down the route of individualizing or position specific coaching is potentially something that's going to be a lot more vital in the next coming years.
Yeah, no, totally. And interestingly, funny enough, on our first series, we actually done an interview with him, Thomas Gronmark. And it's interesting because even just hearing, like you said, about the detail, I mean, some of the questions I was kind of putting to him around, well, how do you classify a successful throw-in? And you're talking about whether it be the build-up, whether it be sort of retaining. You mentioned about a lot of clubs, obviously, well, say, for example, if you've got a throw-in in your own half, if you throw it back to, say, your centre-back, well, that's a successful pass or a successful throw-in because you've retained possession. But you're not really getting anybody putting pressure onto you. Whereas if you're able to keep possession in the attacking half and it may be potentially closer to the penalty area, then that's a totally different scenario. So I think, it is kind of going down that route now. And I think even I've been doing coaching now for about 12, 13 years. And when I first set out, I thought to myself, well, there's such thing as a football coach. I don't think there is now. I think, you won't ever see the label of just a football coach. I mean, like we said, you have, these specialists, whether it be a position-specific coach, whether it be attacking, midfield, defenders, goalkeeping, or whether now a lot of the analysts as well, they're not only very good sort of videographers and editors, but they've also got their coaching qualifications. And as well, a lot of people are now doing degrees within football as well, which is something brand new. So I think, there'll be a lot more sort of specific elements of the game, which is good because, I think the more of these characters and people that you have, obviously it will trickle down not only to first teams, but also to academies. And then we're going to potentially develop better players, which is obviously a positive thing. But kind of looking before we sort of talk about this sort of whole theme around what we're discussing today, I just wanted to kind of touch on, so obviously at the moment you're currently playing in Australia, and also you've played internationally as well. What the kind of differences there? So I mean, obviously playing in Australia, I suppose it's the adapting to the environment, but you know, is the coaching very similar to what it is, say, for example, here in England? And then with the international part of it, obviously you're playing week in, week out for your club, and then you're going to your international team, which potentially might play a totally different philosophy or style of play. How was that experience?
Yeah, Australia's been great. I was only really there 8 weeks before we sort of experienced this, so yeah, it was tough. But I think the thing is with over there, it's the climate that you have to get used to first and foremost. The weather, the heat, the humidity, that sort of stuff. Flying to and from games was tough, but the coaching very similar. I know there's a lot of good coaches over there, and there's we have one especially who's our manager at the minute, and he's very intense, likes things done properly, very much shout positives from the sideline and make sure that everybody's doing things right. He's not one face at all. Basically, like, if you're not going to do it properly, why are you out here? Which I agree with, really, because I think ultimately you practice what you preach. If you're out doing rubbish stuff, you're ultimately going to perform rubbish stuff on a weekend or in your game. So I'm very much a believer in that. But he's been great, and I know that there's a lot of other coaches over there. I mean, people like Robbie Fowler has gone over to Brisbane at the minute, and he's doing some really good stuff, making them play a completely different style of football to what we're playing at Wanderers. As you know, there's a guy over there at the Carl Robinson, who's floated about in the sort of lower leagues, and he's over there doing some good stuff as well. So I mean, ultimately over there, the coaching's a little bit behind in terms of because the league's only very relatively new. I think it's only been going 15 years or so. So it's never going to be at the same level as potentially, say, like the Football League or even the Premier League. But with time and the way that the league grows and the infrastructure behind the scenes grows, and people are a little bit more happier with the way that that's all going, they'll invest a little bit more, and they'll get a little bit more of the Australians coming through because their coaching will be better, the infrastructure will be better, the facilities will be better, all that sort of stuff. So that's just a time thing. That's not necessarily something that they need to really worry about too much now. Give it another 10, 15 years or so when the league's very, very sustainable, and the injection of money into the league, you'll end up getting it not on par, but you'll be very close, I would imagine. And then internationally, you're right. You've got you train all week or months of the season with your club, and your club could be a philosophy of passing the ball around the back, and then ultimately you get 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 days with your international manager, and he wants to kick it straight up the pitch, and you've got to be able to adapt to both. I was pretty lucky when I went onto the scene for the Republic of Ireland. We had a Italian manager, Giovanni Trapattoni, and he was very much a passing philosophy, and I was at West Brom at the time, and we had Roy Hodgson, and Roy Hodgson was very much a tactical man, very much a defensive-minded, unit-based coach, and he has been pretty much, I think, all throughout his career. And it's obviously 75 or 76. I don't want to do him injustice here, but very much he's had that all his career, and he's done him really well. So it wasn't really a too dissimilar, because Italians are very much a defensive, unit-based coaches and people. So ultimately, I just went from one and quite comfortably sort of transitioned into the other. The difference is really that for international managers now, or sort of when I was there, is that you only get 4 days maximum with your players before your first game. And then players are, especially now, and they were when I was there, are on their individual programs. So some may or may not be able to train 4 days before a game. Some might have played on a Sunday, and you're meeting up on a Monday, so they need that extra day of recovery. So then you're into the Tuesday, you know, that sort of thing. So ultimately, as an international manager, I think it's a little bit harder because of the amount of days and probably the amount of players that you have to deal with, especially in your training sessions. You might just only be able to put on like a 4 or 5v5 leading up to your game, whenever that game is, and then probably the day before the game you actually get to over a little bit of tactical and a bit of your philosophy for the game whenever that game is the next day.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think even going back to the points we made earlier, getting to know your players, I suppose that must be a real challenge for international managers because, like you said, just purely down to the time that they get to spend. Now, don't get me wrong, they obviously have a bit more flexibility in being able to go and sort of, you know, see you play for your club within that period of time where it's not international games. But yeah, getting to really understand and sort of really drum home what they're trying to bring out must be quite a challenge. And like I said, for the player as well, because it is that adapting to different styles. So kind of looking at it, obviously all sort of as a whole then really, I mean, obviously great career in terms of starting out, so going from your grassroots, which obviously typically everyone does anyway, but then going to the academies, then going obviously through to various different professional clubs. And I think it's important to experience different clubs. I mean, don't get me wrong, some players stay at clubs for their whole careers, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think just in terms of environment, experiencing different managers, different players, different characters, different scenarios, you know, are you a team that's battling at the bottom of the table and do you need to find a different way of working to try and get out of that trouble? Are you a team that then all of a sudden, you know, you've been relegated, say, for example, but then the next season you're at the top of the tree and, you know, you're dominating the league. So I think it's important to experience these different clubs. And obviously now, obviously over playing in Australia as well. So again, it's a different adaptation to way of life, way of playing, the culture of football. So yeah, I think it's important to experience those different scenarios. It's a very cliche thing, this, but I'm going to in it as well. What would your advice be to sort of young players who are potentially starting up in the game or in academies? But then also, what would your advice be to coaches? So kind of from a player's point of view, something to be aware of or be apparent to when coaching players.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think for players, ultimately, when they're in academies, the one thing I would always say to whether you're 16 or whether you're 18 or 19 and you're coming through and you're in your final years of your academy levels, is to ask questions. Always ask questions. There's never, like I was taught this, there's never a dumb question. You know, if you're uncertain of what you're needing to do, whether you don't really understand fully, whether you just need something clarifying, there's not a silly question in football. And if it's funny because 9 times out of 10, if you're uncertain of something, there's a few others that are uncertain of it as well. And then when you get the answer, everyone's a little bit more on the same page. So that would be my number one probably advice for academy players. Also, listen, things like, you have to do extra little bits, you have to practice, that sort of stuff. Is pretty much a given, I think, through academy level football now, and obviously learning. But I think that's my main thing. Sort of, if anyone's taking anything away from this, is if you're an academy player, definitely ask questions, and that doesn't necessarily have to be to your coaches. That could be that doesn't have to be your coaches. That could be to senior players. Players in the first team who potentially watch your games or have seen you train or seen you play or you've been able to train with. Always ask questions, because ultimately they're in the first team, and you want to get there. So you ask the questions of how did you get there? What did you do differently to, say, your 22 other teammates to get to where you are? That's the sort of thing I would sort of definitely say to the younger players in academies, is always ask a question. And then coaches, I think it's difficult because, especially if you're an academy coaches are basically there to try and nurture and get players to be as best as they possibly can be, so that they're at a level, so that they move up. So 16s, they move up to the 18s, they move up to the 23s, and then ultimately into the first team. So it's just progressing what they've been taught from, the 9s all the way through to under 16s. It's keeping that progression right and true, because ultimately, naturally, players will be talented. I think that's pretty much a given. If you kind of make yourself into an academy level, you've got some sort of ability to be able to perform at that level. It's then the academy coaches' philosophy and decisions that they make that's going to, project you up to the first team. So, as we touched on earlier, everybody's an individual. Everyone develops at completely different ages and timescales, but ultimately, you have to come together as a team. So it's nurturing the ability that they've got, enhancing it if they can, and making sure that you give them much time, give the players as much time as you can do, so that they can fulfill their potential.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think especially as well, because sometimes, and don't get me wrong, we've all done it as coaches, but you kind of let egos kind of take the better sometimes. And I think even at an academy, stage, we know that it is all about development. And like you said, it's that nurturing of the player, but still when there's a match going on and, they may make decisions based purely on, getting the victory, which, potentially may develop and like nurture the player. But at the same time, like you said, that time element, I think is so crucial as well, because, without giving them that time and that involvement, their nature and their talent might not be able to come out.
Yeah, I think ultimately, if you're an academy coach and you say that you're going out starting at 10:30, 11 o'clock, and then your day's done, you think your day's done by 12, like you're not going to give the players the best possible chance to be successful.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, as long as, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that coaches need to have players out there for 5-6 hours, because I would have hated that as a player myself. But ultimately, I think if you are a coach and you are serious about your job and serious about developing players and making players better, time is something that's vital. You're never going to have enough of it, but for the time that you have, especially with that player, because if you're sort of early stages of the academy, if you're sort of the 16s, you've just left school, you've got players from 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and they don't normally leave the training ground until sort of 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. So you've got a good sort of 6, 7, 8 hours where you can, help them in any way, whether that's, strength and conditioning, whether that's, video analysis, whether that's, on the training pitch, technical support, whether that's, individual training, all of that sort of stuff, videos just to recap on games or training and stuff like that. Time is vital I think for coaches, and like I said before, if you're willing to put the time in, players willing to put the time in, I think you'll end up with a nice marriage at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I definitely think the two go together, and it is part of that going on the journey together almost. So yeah, fantastic messages. Listen, Simon, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Fantastic insight into your career, number one as a player. The experience which you've had along the journey and the way. I think, like I said, part of this discussion in this series is all around the experiences which players have had through their coaching. And I think it's so important for coaches and players as well. I think players definitely do benefit from listening to these, but coaches especially, someone like yourself, like I said, played at very different clubs at the highest level, played in different countries, played internationally, and, to hear that from somebody like yourself, it's something which the coaches can hopefully take on board and take away. And not only your experiences, but the messages which you've just given as well have been crucial. So I really do appreciate you giving up the time. And I hope soon, when you do go back over to Australia, the season can start up safely, but, you can get your teeth into it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. I'll catch up with you soon. All right, Simon?
Take care. See you later.
Cheers. Thank you.